Good evening. My name is Eugene, and I'm going to talk about React tonight. I've heard from people around that they've already been using React for a number of years, so I really don't see why they even showed up tonight. But for all those of you who don't know or heard but don't have much understanding of it, I'm going to try and help you get at least a clue. So myself, I have been developing with React for the past 2 years. I've done everything from the small applications to very large, critical, client-facing UIs. So I think I know a fair bit about this framework or whatever the heck that is. So let's begin. So today's presentation will be composed of 3 parts. What is React, React components, and application demo. I actually built an app for you guys. It's simple, but so the React is a JavaScript library. That's the one thing you always have to remember. There have been lots of times when people approach me and said and ask me, so what is React? And I say it's JavaScript. It's like, no, it's not. I heard about React. React is something else. It does server-side rendering. No, it does not do server-side rendering. It's a JavaScript library, and all it does is JavaScript. And because of that, everything that I'm about to show you has to be taken with a grain of salt. Now then, React is best understood when the transpilers are used. If you use something called a transpiler, and a transpiler is a library that takes scripted code and transforms it into plain JavaScript. We're gonna get into it in a few minutes. I'm going to be using Babel for this particular demonstration, but you could also use TypeScript if you like to explode your brain into tiny billion tiny bits. Okay. So what does React do? All React does is generate for you an HTML view. I don't know how many of you are familiar with HTML, but HTML is basically a way the internet works. Everything on internet is first and foremost HTML. That's what generates the view itself. That's what you see when you visit every single website in the world. So the React allows you to do this HTML generation on the client side in plain JavaScript. So you don't actually have to write HTML itself. React will do it for you, so to speak. And what does it do? It allows you to create the dynamic on-the-fly HTML. And that, of course, you would need that if you wanted to build a single-page application, such as Facebook, for example, which is where the React is coming from. Or what else? Or any other single-page application. So, why would you use React? First and foremost, because React is simple, or at least that's what they claim they are. And it really is simple. There's really, literally just a handful of basic functions that do very, very easy to understand things in your code. React is modular. It allows you to create components and then construct your views out of these components. So, which means that you could potentially write a piece of React code and then reuse it in every single one of your applications later on. And React is fast, at least that's what Facebook is claiming once again. Supposedly the benefit of it comes from it not generating HTML right in the browser, but first constructing something what's called a virtual DOM. And that's, of course, a FUD word for a simple JavaScript object. There is really no virtual DOM. There's just a JavaScript object which contains all the definitions for React. Okay. So now we get to the core of what React is. React is constructed of 2 types of components. There is a stateless component, which is the most simplistic type of React component. And all it really is JavaScript function, plain and vanilla, that returns a view, nothing else. It does what's the, okay, so the defining property of it is it does not have a state to it. All the information that it consumes would come from the parent instantiating it. So, right, so I put a little note here. So this notation you're seeing, it's only possible when you use a GSX. It's only used when you are using a preprocessor such as Babel, for example. And the other type of component that React had is a stateful component. Now, the stateful component that differs from the stateless component is that it has a state which it can create and retain. This state can be then passed to all of the children components, the little subviews that you have. Now, the one thing I forgot to mention, React is what's called the declarative UI. Well, it's not really a UI, but it's declarative nonetheless. And that simply means that, once again, it's all components, the little small tidbits of code which can be used and reused over and over again. And the more generic you create them, the easier it would be for you to later include them in many different places in your application. Okay. The stateful components differ from the main difference between stateful and stateless component is this stateful component, beside the state, it also has a life cycle, which stateless component may does not really have. At least they advertise that it does not have, but you can hack it into it, but it's not the point. That the stateless component does not have. So there are three main areas of this life cycle every stateful component has. The first is the component creation. Partition is when your component actually gets processed by React. It reads up your notation and creates this JavaScript object out of it. At that point, it will utilize the class constructor. That's a property of ES6. Regular JavaScript 4 or 5 does not have constructors. But once again, I'm trying to present this from the perspective of the future, not the past. Then the render, that's just a function inside of your component that returns the view. It's exactly the same thing as the stateless component in this particular case. And the component did mount. Now, what does it mean component did mount? When React actually creates your component inside of its virtual DOM, quote unquote, something happened there, quote unquote, it then finds the root node which you've specified, and I'll show you where that happens, and attaches the component to it, and that is called mounting, which basically is another way of saying take this bit of HTML and paste it into this bit of HTML. The next part of the life cycle is the component update. The point of the stateful component is that your state, whenever it changes, generates a new, the gentleman was talking about state machines. This is one of the very, very simple example of those. So the state would change inside of your component, and that would generate the component change. Anytime you click a button or move your mouse over a component, or anytime you make API request and it returns a response, the state of your component changes, and that's basically what you want. Every time the timer ticks, what you're building is a clock. And this particular part has four main areas. Should component update. This is basically a specific way for React to know whether or not it should re-render the component bit. This is where the speed of React, so-called speed of React, is coming from. And most of the time you should leave it alone unless your component is very complex. Then once again render. It's exactly the same render as in the first part. Get snapshot before update. I think I have a slide for this. Okay, anyway. Get the snapshot before update, and that will return the component state that will happen in a moment. That will happen after the component has updated, and component did update, which does pretty much the same thing, which basically I really don't understand what's the point of it. There used to be a different lifecycle before, but now that React has updated and rewritten everything for empty-nth time, this is what you get. And finally, the part where the component gets unmounted from the DOM and destroyed. Let's say the user navigated from one page to another, and everything you see on the previous page is now gone. So once it is gone, every component that is on the page runs this particular 2 bits of lifecycle. Component will unmount, which once again happens when the React detaches or removes the snippet of HTML from the HTML page where it has been attached to, and the component did catch is not really part of this cycle, but you can think of it as it is, because once component catches, it dies. Component did catch happens when your React application has experienced an error. And then this particular bit of code gets activated. So you can actually watch for errors in there. And here I am actually explaining all of these states, but I've already done that, so there is no point. Okay, best React experience. So in order to experience React at its best, like I said in the beginning, you better use something called a transpiler. I personally prefer Babel, but you could use TypeScript. And the packaging library, such as Webpack or Rollup. What that library does, it will take all of your little bits and pieces of your components and combine it as one humongous JavaScript file, which will take ages to download for the for the end user, and result in unnecessary cellular data charges. Okay, now let's see the demo. So I built a small React application for you guys right here. I don't have much time, so I'm just going to very, very quickly go through it. So once again, the application is built, is packaged with Webpack. This is a configuration for it. I'm not going to talk about it because that's not the point of the talk. So the application kicks in here, and this is where the component actually gets mounted to the HTML page in question. Well, you see the document get element root. That's the element where our component is going to end up at. This is a very simplistic example, by the way. So,
Can you zoom in?
can I zoom in? I don't know. Can I zoom in?
Yeah, Control plus. Control plus plus.
Control plus plus.
Oh
yeah.
Magic. So, anywho. The React DOM is a sub-library of React, which allows a very, very simple DOM manipulation. Think about it as a very, very dumbed-down version of jQuery, which has no features. The only feature of it is basically adding the React component to your generic HTML, and removing it. That's all it does, really. So then once the application is mounted on the DOM, we instantiate something called app, and this is app. This is where all the magic is happening, at least for this particular demo. What the app is a stateful component. As you can see, it has a state, very, very simple state, but whatever. So here you see that state actually has application state in it, which is once again going back to state machines. And right, and the loops therein. Yeah, we're gonna see the loop in a moment. Then we implement component did catch in case our wonderful one-page application goes down in flames, and the component did mount. Now, the component did mount once again happens when the React actually physically attaches the view to your HTML page, and at that time we make a call to an API to fetch our images. This is a picture gallery, by the way. I forgot to mention it. Very, very, very simple one. We wait for it to reply, and then we update our application state with the list of images that we've received. And then finally we render it. So what is it that we have rendered? And we have rendered, no, not this. Sorry, this is GitHub. We could have potentially rendered GitHub, but then again, I think it would take a little bit more than 15 minutes. Okay, so come on, Webpack work, and this is the result. Huh? Yes. And this is the result. So everything you see on the screen is a React component. The images are components. The image holder is a component. The header is a component. The footer is a component. There's a very, very simple functionality attached to it, where you can go through the pages, and it would actually tell you what page you are at. Page 0 doesn't sound right, but oh well, I didn't catch that in time for the demonstration. So this is what I was talking about when I was talking about re-rendering and the life cycle. Every time the application state changes, such as when we press this button, once we do, somewhere inside the application, the page count goes up. And we see the page change and the count on top change. And any time I press this button, pretty much the same thing happens. Or any time I make a choice in this particular menu here. So I'm out of time. So I'm not going to go through all of the application, but it's available on GitHub if anybody's interested. I will publish it. I'll publish the actual link a little bit later once I finish the README for it. And now questions. Yes, thank you.
First of all, I want to say props for finishing this at 3 a.m. last night. Second of all, have you used Preact at all, and what's your thoughts on that?
No, I haven't used Preact at all.
Okay.
I don't have any thoughts on that.
Do you have a preference for any sort of like more involved state management systems like Redux or Rollbacks or anything like that?
I think the simpler the better, but of course this is a very bare bones. I specifically did not include Redux or a React router or any of that shebang,
Yeah.
not to complicate the whole setup and the demonstration. Otherwise it would have taken all night.
Yeah.
But in terms of preferences, there is a number of smaller, simpler state management libraries out there besides Redux. I personally think that Redux is a bit over convoluted. As to what they are, I can't. Nothing is coming to mind. But in a couple of projects, I use something really, really simple and small. As soon as I remember what it is, I'll say.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess it kind of bounces off what you said.
Right.
But like, how do you find routing with React? Like, how simple is it for you to say like what /page number for the photos and what you route there? Like, how long would that take you to?
Right. I didn't use any routing here, but the React router is pretty self-explanatory as far as routing is concerned. Though I personally think the Angular routing is much simpler in that particular. In this particular regard, but nonetheless, React has a number of the only problem with React is it has a number of different routers which all of them do something else completely. One router is for the React Redux router, React DOM router, React Hash router, React something else router, people get really confused around them. And they all loop, and the problem is they all work differently. I don't know what the reason for that is. Yes?
You mentioned a couple times performance.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts?
So thoughts on that. Now, taking this with a grain of salt, the HTML itself is not the most performant vehicle on the planet. So the internet is slow no matter what you do. We try to speed it up with the super powerful processors in our machines, but it's still kind of laggy. Now, saying that, React advertising super performance, but unless you actually actively manage your performance with the states and the should component mount, your application is not going to be, depending on complexity, your application is not going to be any faster than that same written in Vue or Angular or Meteor or any other front-end library. Ember, yes, thank you.
If you're going to suggest people use one library with React, which one would you suggest people use?
Ooh.
Oh.
Yeah, That's a
Babel.
tough one.
Wow.
What should we use with React, really? In what sense? What kind of library?
Any sense? Do you, in the projects that you've built, like, do you have like one thing that you constantly go to?
Yeah, I like Rollup Package Manager.
Roll up? Okay.
Yeah, versus Webpack, which I hate.
Okay. Why is that?
I don't know. Personally, find the Webpack is a little bit more, not a little bit, it's far more complicated than Rollup, and then it produces unpredictable code. I really hate the way they package it. Transforming everything into string and then eval at runtime, I don't think that's a sensible way of doing things.
Okay. Cool.
Have you ever run into Parcel.js?
Parcel.js, it's a packager, right?
Yep.
No, but I heard about it.
Okay.
Is it any good?
I'm actually trying to figure out if anyone has used it.
Oh, right.
I'm
Okay.
still in that process.
Zero config for life now.
At some point in time, I evaluated a bunch of them and ended up with Rollup. I don't know why. I thought it was simpler and cleaner, and also, yeah, it looked prettier. Oh, that's a big thing, right? Yes.
By looking prettier, do you mean config file?
Yeah.
Okay.
You mentioned server-side rendering. Is that common in React?
It is becoming more common nowadays with Google being a real jerk and everything. No, seriously, it's freaking 2018 outside, and they still require server-side rendering for their stupid Google bot to index your site. But in general, yeah, it's becoming more common. I'm not sure if that's a healthy trend or unhealthy trend, but
Right. The Google
Yeah.
indexer executes client JavaScript.
it does, but it doesn't. Yeah.
Can you elaborate?
Yes, they
You elaborate afterwards in the social tab.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Okay. Yeah.